You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your divinely appointed host, Abraham.
And I'm your heavy as the head host, Shane.
We're a psychology podcast. We talk about the things that people do, what they have done throughout history and maybe still continue to do, and sometimes why they do things that are mostly just subjugating other people.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about power and gemstones and royalty and all the things that go along with the idea of royalty and monarchies and empires and pharaohs and the catch-all that is royal blood.
So much of that. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. We are so happy to have you. If you like what you hear today here on this episode, you can join us on Patreon, like and subscribe, leave us a rating and review, pick up some merch, and tell someone. I was thinking about this. I think that almost every podcast I currently listen to, someone recommended to me. I don't think there's any that I have in my roster that I just found.
That's true. I also have the same experience. So please recommend, because that's how people like us.
That is my my challenge, I guess, to you. My cry for help. I don't know. My suggestion: go tell someone. Everyone, go tell one person, and then we will have quite a few new people, and it'll be great.
Yes, we will. It'll be wonderful. But first, we do a thing at the beginning of the show where we like to celebrate random holidays on the day this comes out, right?
Yeah, this is September 18th, and that means that we need to point out and wish you all a happy First Love Day.
Aww. It's also Chiropractic Founders Day.
Ooh. We might need to talk about chiropractors at some point.
Oh, we should.
It is Hug a Greeting Card Writer Day.
Aww.
I don't know any of those.
I love greeting cards. It's International Read an eBook Day.
Oh, okay. Read any book, really.
Yeah, sure.
The suggestion. National Ceiling Fan Day. Those are critically important for some people in certain areas and under certain circumstances.
The house I grew up in, the ceiling fan was very low, and I almost always hit my head on it because it was like several inches above my head.
I'm thinking it was not very low, but you are very tall.
That's really the issue. It was a normal size. It was like an average height fan. I was just too tall for my house.
Yeah.
It's National Cheeseburger Day. I would celebrate with an Impossible Burger.
Yeah. National HIV, AIDS, and Aging Awareness Day. Both of those lumped together now, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's good because historically those things were not things that you would see together. So it's nice that those things are coming together, which is really wonderful.
Yay. Thank you, medicine.
Yay. Modern medicine and technology and science and education. Isn't it grand? Also, today is National Rehabilitation Day. I love that.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah. National Respect Day. Oh, well, we will not be honoring that with today's episode.
No, not today, folks. We will be honoring National School Backpack Awareness Day.
Yeah, you should be aware that there are such things as school backpacks.
Yes.
It is Rice Krispies Treats Day. Oh, I loved those when I was younger.
Oh, well, lucky for you, I've got a recipe to make vegan ones, if you would like.
Sure.
And they are tasty. It is World Bamboo Day.
Nice. It is World Water Monitoring Day. That one seems quite important.
I would agree. As far as weeks go, it is Adopt a Less Adoptable Pet Week. So adopt that old man puppy or whatever it is that you might need to find.
I love old animals. They're so cute and so chill. And while you're doing that, you can look at the stars because it is Astronomy Week.
I'm a Capricorn. It's a Balance Awareness Week.
It is Build a Better Image Week. Fair?
Yes. It is Constitution Week, which is interesting. That's in September.
That is interesting. I wonder why. It is International Clean Hands Week. I'm going to go ahead and extend that to Clean Hands Century.
Yes. Super important. And it's also Malnutrition Awareness Week.
Somewhat related to clean hands, but not directly.
Yeah.
Okay, but that is just to let you all know that there are things that people have decided to celebrate this day or this week, the 18th of September. And that's really cool. So great on all of those things. But as we said, what we're actually tackling here today is royalty. I am going to preface this by sort of talking about why I even wanted to learn more about this topic. And I guess long story short, it just had to do with the fact that I was thinking about kings, queens, the power that they have, the kinds of weird rituals that run in the echelons of people at that level, and got to thinking, why did that ever even happen? And sort of when and what's going on there. So I wanted to learn all about it and then share my knowledge with everyone. And of course, most importantly, superimpose my understanding of human behavior on top of it, because you and I are both psychologists. We are trained in this field, specifically in human behavior, and have advanced degrees in this. So we like to talk about those sorts of things. And royalty is a thing that is applied to humans and therefore is related to what humans do, and therefore is in the purview of things that we will cover on this show.
Yes, it's still a thing that people do, that people respond to. It's a thing that still exists in our world today. And at least in the United States, on a scale that is pretty visible still.
Yeah.
Like, we talk about the royals more often than a country who hated the royals should talk about.
It seems like there are some people in the United States who are citizens of the United States who would like to see the United States adopt a monarchy type system of government. I don't understand that view, and maybe they won't either after we explain more about this. So let's start unpacking how royalty works.
Yes, so ever since humans started living in groups larger than a single family, most of the time we have been humans. We have arguably had that. But one of the things that defined our species was that we have lived in groups that were not single families. However, we have had some version of leadership that concentrates power. So there has been some person that has concentrated the power of that group together and led that group, that tribe, that community, whatever it might be.
And we don't mean power in the sense of batteries or wind turbines. No,
Nope.
We mean power in a sense, meaning that people in these positions can make decisions that affect the entire group. If you think of like the 5-year-old in the group, they're not making decisions that affect everyone. We wouldn't want them to do that. They're not good at that sort of thing yet. But we're going back way a long time ago, because 5-year-olds have done that in the past.
Yes, they have.
5-year-olds definitely will rule their house in some instances, even today. But we're just talking generically about these groups of people. You'd have this person who has the ability to sort of command the behavior of a lot of people in the group, and not everyone has that same ability. And this can range from very basic rules about what people can and can't do to things like where we shelter, how and what we worship, what we wear, and even well beyond that scope of things.
Right. So, of course, people mostly started as tribal groups with leadership concentrated in the hands of a leadership council, or even as far as in the hands of only one person in some instances. So you'll find some examples of leadership in early human culture that will be a group of people that make a decision together, and maybe they'll have somebody that will, like, I don't know, consult, something like that. Like you'll see, like in some situations where a shaman might consult or an oracle might consult or something like that.
Yeah.
Or you'll have a single person that will make all the decisions, regardless of consultation, regardless of insight, regardless of the wishes of other people.
Yes. Not super sustainable, that model, as we'll find, but anyway, so these groups, they sort of band together. They more or less have some amount of power restricted to a small-ish set of people in that group. The leadership council, or even the leader, might have the most power or something. But this sort of developed, and what might be called a quote-unquote civilization evolved as tribes established permanent residences and sort of living spaces. They established agriculture, trade. They started building sort of economic structures with things like money. And we did a whole episode on money and sort of how that came to be. And sort of very early in this process, the leadership structure sort of began to consolidate and distill into a smaller and smaller group as the overall group sort of expanded. They'd get more and more people. aggregated together, and yet the power would be distilled into a small, increasingly small, sometimes narrowed down to a single ruler level of people that are at the very, very top, the sort of top 1%, 1% of 1%, as Bernie might say, that had all or most of the power.
Right. So mostly this ruler would acquire a lot of land, either through military conquest or purchasing it. Either way, they would control one of the greatest assets a person can have, land. When you're talking about farming, when you're talking about residence, when you're talking about shelter and all those things, land becomes increasingly and incredibly important. Obviously, this one person cannot be responsible for maintaining all of the land. So essentially, these leaders would offer to protect to distribute resources across these lands in exchange for money, obedience, and resources. Might sound a little bit familiar, right?
Yeah. So basically, if this sounds familiar, this is more or less how the mafia or the mob operates or operated. Are they still operating? Let's just say operates.
Allegedly operated.
Okay, allegedly. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Which is to say, like, a mob would go into a business, threaten or even damage that business, and then offer to quote unquote protect that business in exchange for a regular fee from that business for their protection. This is kind of what these rulers would do, right? They'd walk into this land where people are hanging out and they're like, this land is mine now. I control it. So give me your stuff and I promise I won't hurt you. Matter of fact, I'm going to take your stuff now and I won't hurt you any more than I'm already going to.
Right.
As long as you continue to send me stuff. Now, if something else happens, I will come and protect you also from others. And like, let's just say you have a really bad crop year. I can send you crops from other parts of my kingdom. So there's some perks here. It's not all bad, but yeah, your stuff is mine now and you have to do what I say. That was kind of more or less the strategy they brought to this. So I think the way I think about this is they're very parasitic, right? Like they sort of would just leech off of the people around them, giving much less back than they received. There was an exchange, and they weren't uniformly all powerful, as we'll see as we talk about some of the histories and the examples here. But that was more or less the dynamic of the relationship as someone who's like, I don't really feel like working. I'm going to just make people give me their stuff.
Yeah.
And then they became the ruling class, if you will.
Yep. And that's how we get here. So this started happening thousands of years ago in many places throughout the world. This wasn't like a specific area that this happened. It's happened all over the world thousands of years ago in multiple cultures. So in ancient China, dynasties may have started forming as early as 2070 BCE when the ruling Xia family consolidated power and their influence to repair damage after a great flood. So basically a flood happens, they come in and they go, we're going to help you, but now you owe us. So we're going to fix this, but now you owe us and now you belong to us. Now, but the evidence for this is kind of murky though, and it may have instead started around 1600 BCE by the Shang dynasty, which ruled for over 500 years.
And many people will have heard of some of these Chinese dynasties. Super fascinating history, a lot of like interesting power, but essentially they went through this process. There would be a dynasty that was mostly a family that would rule for sometimes a short period of time, like a single generation or two, and sometimes for many hundreds of years, but they never actually lasted. Like none of them stood the test of time, really. They were always something that would eventually move, shift, change, be replaced by something else as the culture evolved. And then when the new era of the new dynasty came in, it was almost always followed by pretty significant cultural upheaval in the sense that like major progress would be made on something where it wasn't being made before. Some practice might change or stop. Some place would get really, really developed and become more urban. There was something. It was just a really interesting time in history.
Right. Absolutely.
In Africa, Egyptians were obviously Northern Africa. They were pioneering a form of sort of monarchical government under a king labeled as the Scorpion King. So apparently that's a real thing as far back as 6000 BCE. So this is quite a long time ago. Most of the Egyptian rulers were called pharaohs, is a name that many people will likely have heard. But really, they did serve a fairly similar function as other kingdoms. There was often this level of protection, but also you have to give me all your stuff. And there was a lot involved in trade. So there's a lot of commerce going on there, which meant that there was also things like the development of culture was a big part. But anyway, at its height, the Kemetan, people have maybe heard of Kemet, the Kemetan Empire, also called the New Kingdom under Pharaoh Amenhotep III, stretched all the way from modern-day Egypt across the Mediterranean coast to where Turkey is today, which is a really, really big chunk of land. They covered a huge amount.
Right. The Egyptian Empire was largely just this major, Egyptian rulers covered quite a bit of area. And you'll find like other African empires, other African kingdoms would cover smaller areas. Like the Congo kingdom was actually a much smaller area and kind of isolated to the west coast.
Sure.
And the Great Zimbabwe Empire was like more centralized, like Southeast Africa. And it was like, so you'll find that like we'll talk about it, where some of these empires and some of these kingdoms were vast lands. Some of them were much smaller and covered a much smaller kind of area, maybe where they gathered resources and they were isolated from other places. But none of them covered as much area, landmass, or ear space as Ads did.
We will actually talk a little bit about another African kingdom, but another really big one to cover first is called the Caliphate. And this was a kind of unique kingdom in the history of kingdoms around the world. This was a Muslim religious political government. And it existed after the death of Prophet Muhammad around 630 BCE. This was functionally a kingdom like other kingdoms, but it was directly intertwined with the religion of the land. Now, most other kingdoms that did have religion as part of their ruling, the actual church was adjacent to the kingdom. Like it was, the religion was adjacent to the ruling class. But in the Caliphate, the religion was the ruling class. Like that was directly part of it. And the leader of the Caliphate was called the Caliph, or the Caliph, I think Caliph maybe. And so it was a religious figurehead of state that also governed by religious decree and sort of dictate, if you will.
Right. So there's also the kingdom of Aksum, which is what is now northern Ethiopia, and rose to prominence at least a few thousand years ago, and was one of the first empires in Africa to develop written language. It seemed to rise to prominence as a juggernaut of trade and commerce, probably why writing became so useful. And when you kind of look at where this existed, it was on kind of the eastern coast, just above the Horn in Ethiopia. And that's like a perfect space to be able to travel some of the rivers up the Nile and across the ocean, or across the sea over into the Middle Eastern Panhandle over there.
It became quite economically powerful as a kingdom in Africa. Of course, many people will have heard of the well-known Roman Empire that started expanding. I mean, there was a long intertwining history of this, but it really started expanding roughly around 100 BCE. And at its peak, it covered an impressive 1.6 million square miles of territory. That includes parts of Europe, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. It was quite a substantial chunk of land. Although I actually think I remember hearing about, and I forgot to look this up in the context of this, but I think that the area ruled by Genghis Khan, although ruled is maybe not the exact right way to describe his power,
sure,
was like many times the size of the Roman Empire. But anyway, that was the Roman Empire. The kingdom obviously went through rulers like toilet paper and just multitude of brutal coups and backstabbing and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, actual literal backstabbing. Very bloody and gruesome. Anyway, this kingdom, this empire as it existed, oversaw a pretty tremendous unification of commerce, technological innovation, and culture that has really kind of continued to influence the world long after its existence.
Right. I mean, we see that kind of that ripple throughout our culture quite a bit. Now, of course, Europe had some of the most and the oldest kingdoms, and these mobsters would take over people's land and then charge them a tax to protect it, as we described earlier. Very much so extortion and larceny and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
But because they could not monitor all of their land, they would appoint figureheads across the land as lesser rulers or nobles in a system called fiefdom. These minor kings could essentially rule the land as they wished, only having to answer to the actual king, send money and resources and armies if and when needed. So a higher king would say, hey, little kings, send me your stuff. Send me your armies when I want them. Send me gold. Send me foods. Send me foodstuffs, and I will be happy and fat over here in this castle while you all do whatever you're doing.
Yeah. There were lots of names for the royalty. As a matter of fact, we can spend a second, I think, talking about some of the names as they existed. But like vassals was another name for people who were essentially subjects ruled by the sort of overall king. And part of it had to do with they wanted to specifically make sure they were not calling them kings.
Right.
So they had all their titles they'd come up with. There was like Dutch and Baron and Duchess and Baroness and
Lord, Lady.
Yeah, things like that. Duke, if I didn't mention that one already. And so they would come up with these other titles that were meant to show you have a level of power, you have a noble title and noble like social status, but you are not the king, importantly.
Right.
So you do get to command respect. You do get to tax your regions, incidentally, like they were responsible for their own taxes. But the titles were actually pretty important. Although weirdly, one that we found in looking up for this was that prince did not necessarily mean just the son of a king. Prince could actually refer to kind of any male royal blood, sometimes was even used as the name for the king. But in British monarchies, when they took over in India and they were installing Indian figureheads under their rule, they specifically called them princes because they wanted to distinguish them from the king. So like, you may be rulers over here, but you are not the king.
Yeah, and I think something that's really important to kind of pin down on this is that in all these different examples, there are a lot of ways that people came into power as part of these kingdoms or empires, right? So Roman Empire, you saw democracy start to emerge. You saw Caesars start to show up. You saw people who were, part of a bloodline that became, the next in line. But also there was this like kind of like semblance of democracy that started showing up. You had other places that were the eldest was elected the leader of the group or the charge of the tribe or whatever it might be. There's a lot of different examples of this, but something that kind of started to show up and started to form that was really kind of annoying was this issue of divine rule. So there would be folks that would show up and go, here I am, appointed by God.
Yeah.
Here I am to rule you by a person who you cannot see. But this type of thing happened, and this was not unique to Europe. And I want to be really clear about this, because I think a lot of times you think like, oh, God appointed this king, so they must be the ruler. But you saw that in Egypt as well. Like you saw that with the pharaohs, that a lot of them were like, there was divine intervention to ensure that the pharaohs were part of the monarchies and whatnot that existed. This happened all over the world.
It did.
This idea of divine rule.
Yeah, and you exactly as you said, it kind of had to do with both how they acquired power and how they then chose to preserve that power. And you can see some of the selection pressures that might specifically influence how and why they made the decision to bring in like, I'm your ruler. For one thing, if you imagine someone who's sort of pissing people off a lot and they're going like, we really don't like you as our ruler, then one way they can try and preserve their status, make sure they're not being questioned, or at least try and lower the questioning, is to say like, listen, I don't want this job any more than you want me to have it, but I was chosen. Smith. Yeah, I have to be here because God put me here. So like, sorry, but like, it's just kind of the way it is.
Now give me your wife.
Yeah, I'm gonna take your wife and your money and your food now. And God also told me to kill you. So like, that's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know if there were a lot of kings that were apologizing for that though.
No, they never said sorry.
They were going, sorry, gotta do this. Like, sorry, oh, this job sucks. They were going, nope, that's mine.
Yeah, actually, it was a lot more in anger. Like, how dare you question God? I'm gonna take your wife.
Yeah,
a lot more like that. But anyway, I think there was some practical avoiding or pushing away questions by saying that they were divine, they were inspired by divinity. Another one I think is that it did help, I think, often to use the church's influence to essentially say like, because the church was a power into itself, right? And like I said, most of the time the church was adjacent to the monarchy, not like the caliphate, which was the church, but like
right.
Most of the time it was adjacent to it. And so having them on your side was important. Now that did mean they sort of had to cooperate with church leaders. But again, like a king can kind of do a lot of things, and they could potentially install people in the church to say like, you are like going to do my bidding, and in exchange, I'm giving you a very plush life over here. So like,
yes,
you back me up saying God gives me messages. I speak for God, and I'm going to give you all these goodies, and like, you can have whatever sinful life you want behind closed doors. You just make me look good to the people.
Right. And I think an important part of that too is that I mean, not that doesn't happen now, but I do think that probably happened more often in spaces where kings or monarchies or royalty had more absolute power. Like, I think what we see today is kind of a shell of what you would expect, like kind of what we know to be kings and all the stuff like that we hear about in stories and whatnot. Like, what we see today is a little bit more of a shell. It's almost like a representative or a ceremonial title or something like that. It doesn't have the same kind of power that monarchies in the in the late BCE type of situations we're experiencing. So I think there is it is important to note that we probably could influence the church in a different way back then, because you did have the absolute power to do that as a king. But now it's more like, you can, but it's going to go on social media.
Yeah, and absolute monarchies kind of don't exist anymore. There might be like a handful of them here and there, but it is, as you said, the absolute monarchy is one where the king basically has no constrictions, or the royalty, whoever they are, has no restraints on what they do. No one puts them in check. Nobody tells them no. There are no rules that they have to follow. They can do whatever. Those have been rare throughout history. And I mean, of all the unsustainable garbage that is this system, that is probably the least sustainable. Because again, like, if you think about the fact that you do have people, like, everything that you get, people are doing for you. And if you piss off enough of them, you won't have anybody to do anything for you anymore. Right?
Well, right.
So like, either you get your jollies off by being benevolent and then people want you around, or else you are mostly going to get undermined really quickly, which is usually what happened.
Yeah.
So like, the most selfish people who tried to have and consolidate the most power were the most likely to not last very long, because there is an element to having to work with others. That actually brings me to another sort of really interesting point about kings and their sort of privileges and whatnot. Kings and queens, the whole royal monarchy, essentially.
Right.
One more thing I wanted to point out, just as you were talking about with respect to this divine rule thing, which was the aspect of, and this is going to send us off on a totally different side tangent here, but let's just say, for example, someone gives you a ton of power. They're like, listen, you can go ahead and make decisions for us now and for always. That's your right. And we're just going to do whatever you say. We're going to give you what you want, whatever. You might think to yourself, that sounds really cool. How do I make sure this doesn't go away?
Right.
And so there's a certain amount of like sustaining that power as long as possible that's embedded in the divine rule. But that also relates to the fact of like, okay, hold on. That's all well and good, but there's a lot of people around me that I care about, that if I go away or if power is taken from me for some reason, I don't want them to be screwed up either. So here's what I'm going to do. Or like, here's why I might want to use divine rule, divine appointment as the excuse for my power, is I'm like, I'm going to make sure that my family is always well taken care of. So I'm just going to marry my cousin so that it never leaves the family, right? Like, I'll have their family now gets a lot of my privilege, but that's okay. We're still family. It's cool. Is like a way that they might go. And so you can kind of see how the selection pressure of power really does incentivize intermarrying into your own family, also called incest.
I literally have no way to seg out of that. So I think I'm just going to say ads here, and then we can come back to this because I think we all need a minute.
Okay, so we dropped the incest bomb.
Yeah, it was bound to happen.
It was, yeah. We're going to have to talk about that for a second, I think.
Yeah. So historically, what you'll hear is that royal families will often, they'll keep it in the family, partially because, and I have a feeling, I wonder, and maybe we can kind of talk about this for a second. I wonder how much of this was a joke gone wrong. Like, or like kind of like somebody like talked themselves into a corner. Like there was one king one day that was like, God said me and my family are divine appointments. So that means my family is supposed to be here. And then somebody was like, but sir, what if you have a child with somebody who's outside of your family? And they go, no, we will not do that because it's inside my family. Watch as I kiss my cousin. And then
That's
like, right. I think it was like they backed themselves into a corner. Like I feel like that was like, and all of them were just like, oh, this is such a bummer. But like, we got to keep up because like, if you want jewels, we have to do this. Ugh.
Some of them wanted it.
Some of them wanted it for sure. But I think also too, like I think that this creates a different problem. And we're going to talk about the incest thing a little bit because we want to unpack that. But I think this creates kind of a unique problem, right? Because the idea of power is passed down through the family, which means that the minute that somebody is born, or like whatever system it is, there's a lot of different systems. So I don't want to oversimplify it. But the idea is that you are creating somebody who wants what you have and is willing to move you out of the way to get what you have.
That's
so
true.
Now you've created a child or a series of children that all go, no, it's me. So you've got like siblings killing each other because they're like, I want to be the king. And then the king going, no, I don't like you. I'm going to kill you and get you out of the way. And then like, it's just, it's a mess because you just kind of incentivize murdering everybody so that the person who sticks it out can just be the king or the queen or whoever it might be. Like, it's such a bad incentive for like keeping families together.
Yeah. I mean, it literally tore them apart in some of those instances.
Yeah.
There was an interesting thing that I also read where they sort of were talking about the fact that during one British queen's rule, I don't remember, she really negotiated this, like marrying to different families around. And on the one hand, they talked about the effect of this was it was very peaceful because you got to think most of the time where you had a monarchy, an actual royalty, that they were essentially the rulers of this swath of land, whatever it is, they would then be in direct competition with the next ruler over there who has their own vassals and their own lands that they rule. And so if anybody wanted to expand their territory or one of them started doing really well and the others were like, hey, I want their resources they have all of a sudden, then they would war with each other. And that is very expensive. They would often have to fund them themselves. They would have to use up the people who are essentially funding their lifestyle by sending them into a war because God knows the king's not going over there.
Right.
Or any of the royal family for that matter. And so they would war with each other and it was costly and it wasn't really good for business. And most businesses, I mean, the arms business did well, but most businesses didn't do well.
Right.
And so instead they would send their family over to marry because now it's like, it doesn't even matter how much I hate that person. They have my grandson now. And like that matters a lot to me, right? So there was some like the marrying around to different houses had a couple of effects. One is it did help to increase the genetic diversity. It also helped to instill peace, and it could start to unify the kingdoms all together so that there was just, some relative harmony, some sharing, some cooperation, which, basically is all the things that governments would eventually try and tackle. Some of them less than others, but that was more or less the structure that happened with an important caveat, which is that going back to the incest thing, they had kind of been intermarrying for a long time. So like even sending someone over to this other royal family, probably still like cousins and stuff. There's still some recessive genes that are going to find a way to express themselves because they're carrying the same recessive genes in that bloodline over there. So anyway, there was an aspect of that was like, cool, genetic diversity, good, peace in the land, good. Also, it's still the same royal people it's always been.
Right. And there's a lot of reasons why that would occur. And the most common reason you'll hear is because they wanted to keep their divine bloodline pure. Like there are people that really believe that this is a divine appointment. Like God told me that me and my family are supposed to be here. So in order to keep the blessings abound, in order to ensure that we are blessed forever, we're going to go ahead and make our family tree just a trunk by keeping everybody inside of it. And we are not going to allow any sort of other blood to get into our family tree in such a way that it will dilute the divinity of our bloodline.
Right.
And part of that was superstition, part of that was religious belief, part of that was whatever, but ultimately that led to a lot of problems, a lot of genetic, we'll say, changes. Maybe not a lot of healthy, not a lot of healthy babies that were born out of this kind of process.
True.
Because of what you just described, which is those recessive genes expressing themselves and creating some unique medical problems.
Yeah.
It happened a lot. I mean, didn't they believe, and this is me talking off the top of my head, but wasn't that kind of the thought with like King Tut? Wasn't that like the thing is like they thought that he was a product of like siblings or like cousins who like had a baby and he himself had some like genetic deformities?
I don't remember. I didn't run across that, but that it'd be interesting to look that up. If you're listening to this and you're screaming at your phone saying, or whatever you're listening to us through saying no, or whatever, like write us and let us know. But that could be.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've heard this more than once.
Okay.
Yes. So apparently his parents were full siblings.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
I love that I had that useless knowledge in the back of my head. Why would I ever need that? I'm not a history major. I never taught history. I wanted to teach history, but it's stuck in the back of my head. Like, I can't remember what I ate 3 days ago, but I can remember that King Tut's parents were siblings.
That worked out for us today.
It did. You know what? You're right. One day, maybe I'll end up on Jeopardy with like stupid and I'll be like, yeah, I remember that one.
I mean, that kind of is the whole goal of the podcast for everyone who's listening.
Yeah. Who are his parents? For 100. Thank you.
Yes. To me, the logic of the like keeping the bloodline pure, it's kind of funny. I mean, and it comes from a position of just knowing this stuff now. And obviously they didn't.
Sure.
But to me, it's sort of like, I'm not drinking that water. I don't know where that's been. I'm going to drink my urine because that came out of me. I'm divine. So like my pee is the only thing I'm drinking to keep my liquid intake pure.
Yeah. And then why am I so thirsty? Why don't I feel good all the time? Well,
these are the things your body's trying to get out of you.
Yeah.
The water part's gone.
You are dehydrated, my liege. Kill him.
Yeah, that's right. Off with his head. So mostly what we're finding is that mostly European kingdoms tried to avoid sibling marriages. I mean, avoid doesn't mean not do. It just means do not that much.
It's not never.
But
it's not never.
But did avoid. And so in Prussia, Britain, and Spain, it was marrying in the family. It was cousins. It may have been nieces and nephews. It may have been aunts and uncles. May have been second cousins, but they were related in there. This was not the case in some places, and not to call them out necessarily, but Hawaii was one where it was the opposite intent.
Yes, I think it's important to clarify here too that when we are talking about cousins, we're not talking about cousins by marriage.
Yes. Yeah, no,
just
they're
to clarify
fully
that
cousins.
They are fully
my
cousins.
Brother. That's my uncle's kids are the people I'm marrying.
This happened all over the place. Like this happened for lots of reasons, right? Like this happened because it was planned. It happened because maybe the royalty had an extensive bloodline, because maybe the royalty were a little bit more promiscuous. So it was just a higher likelihood that would happen because they had so many kids. I mean, that's kind of what happened with Genghis Khan, right? Like he had so many kids and all over the place that like all of his kids had kids. And then now you've got a lot of people who have like are direct descendants somewhere along the line to Genghis Khan. So like it's one of those things where, you know, sometimes it was by accident. Many times it was on purpose, though.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of on purpose. And so in the Hawaiian structure, they apparently did not have a word for incest. And it was actually considered, again, just trying to recount history here, special care was specifically taken to try and select the nearest possible relative as wife. So it was brothers and sisters, and that would be dubbed. There was a special word for this. Like this was, I don't remember what it was, but like this was a specific practice of marrying siblings really close. And the child, if one was to be born, would be called, the kapu rank was what it was. And they said that these were equal to gods. And actually, because there is a lot of expression of recessive genes in these marriages that would result in things often like, or such as genetic deformities or underdeveloped parts of their body, etc., they, interestingly, in that and other religions, were then referred to as godlike creatures.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to sit in on some talks while I was in Hawaii and listen to some of the history and the storytelling about like the emergence of the island and all that. And this actually is true for a lot of cultures where a baby that is not born, like it was described in some of the storytelling as like a baby that was born deformed would be considered godlike or a demigod or representative of some land. And there's like a lot of really cool stories across multiple indigenous peoples about how a baby would be born with shark-like features or like plant-like features, and they would be representative of some part of the land or some part of the area that they were in. So there's like, it's a really cool story mechanism, like storytelling mechanism as well. But one thing I want to be clear about is that it was only a matter of time before we ended up on the incest thing. But I want to be clear that like, because we're talking about royalty, incest is not the reason that we did kings. Right? Like
that's true.
That's like kind of a tangential thing that people hang up on. Like what ultimately happened is the reason we ended up with kings is because you had folks who were leaders that consolidated power and then used reasons to stay in power and used reasons to keep their families in power and maintain that power. Now we have different versions of that. We have generational wealth is an example of that today.
Very much so.
Like, so when you kind of talk about that, it's the same principles, but it looks different. The thing about kings, though, and royalty is that it ultimately was not sustainable. Like you see monarchs fall, you see empires fall, you see government changes, you see families disappear, you see people detract, right? They detract from the group. Like there's all these different things that happen that make it so a single family cannot sustain that for forever. And that's something that happens too. So the idea of a monarchy can't sustain despite the fact that they have amassed so much power in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I mean, for multiple reasons. I will say really quick while we're on this, democracy is fairly new as a system of government relative to how other governments have existed. So democracy has not had to stand the test of time the way that many kingdoms tried to stand the test of time. Most of them did not last terribly long, but some of them did last a few hundred years. And like democracy hasn't even had that chance yet, really, in the most democratic form. There hasn't been anything quite like it, really, and so it's still kind of new, and so we'll see how long it lasts. So I think there's a critical sort of aspect of that to think about, like, do we know that democracy is going to last longer? We don't. It is inherently set up to not concentrate the power that exists in the hands of the same family of people over and over again, mostly. It's mostly not set up for that.
Right.
It is mostly set up to let power change hands frequently. And I mean, various countries have different intervals, but we're usually talking on the order of like a decade is really common of an interval for democracies to be like, okay, we've done this one for a while. We're going to now advance to the next one. And we're going to just keep on churning through changes here because we are marching forward through time, no matter how much we want to march backwards sometimes.
Right.
Some people, not me, but some people. And so I think just to say, like, some monarchies did last a long time, but there is an inherent problem with monarchies that it tends to just collapse them fairly quickly. There is an inherent problem in podcasts that is ads. Okay, we're back. I think that was our last break for the inherent problems of podcasts. But as we were talking about, I think the issue with kingdoms, and this actually is going to segue nicely into one of the discussions that is maybe the last discussions we have about them, is thinking about the privileges that come with kingdoms or royalty, monarchy, the people who occupy those spaces. And again, as I mentioned, like, if we think about the fact that people rule, all that means is that they can command other people to behave, and those people will behave in accordance with those commands.
Right.
Ultimately, that's what it comes down to, right? And people can be pushed pretty far in that system to do a lot of things they might not have otherwise done, but there's going to be a point at which that breaks. And when you concentrate power into the hands of some people, unless they're very competent at their job, it's pretty easy to lose the confidence of other people who are pretty eager to take that power away from you.
Right.
And take over that position. That could be other monarchies. It could be people inside the kingdom. It could be your own family, as we discussed.
Right.
So the incentive structure is there. If there's not like a clear rule on how we select our leaders, but leaders either take by force or just get it because they're related to us. Like if anything else happens or if something starts to break down, there are a lot of people who would be pretty happy to take that power away and take it for themselves. And so there are always kind of balancing the game of like, I don't actually have anything. I don't have skills.
Right.
I don't have resources. I just have these people that for whatever reason will do whatever I tell them to do. And the moment they choose to not do that thing, I'm in big trouble.
Yeah.
And so that comes a little bit back to the sort of divine appointment thing of like why you shouldn't say no to me.
Well, and on top of that, there's a reason why the term regicide exists, right? Like,
right. Yeah. There's a whole term for it.
There's a whole term for it because royalty were killed all the time for this very thing. It could be that, you know, the people were unhappy with their rule. It could be that their son or their daughter was going to take over and they wanted the power sooner, or they weren't happy that another person was going to get the power. You know, there's lots of reasons why it happened, but regicide exists because of that very reason, which is somebody cannot hold on to power for very long because they cannot keep people pleased for long enough. That's why we see in the United States in like democracy in the way that exists is that power switches hands every few years because like at least switches. I say like, it's like, you know, not like a tennis court type of switching hands. It's more like a ping pong table. Like it's just kind of like, you know, still within arm's reach, you know, everything's kind of around the center. But the reason that it changes so often is because that is the ebb and flow of the people. And if we were in a monarchy, it would be shocking if the same king or the same family maintain that for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is like culture changes, people change, and what people want and need from their government shifts over time. And so the king often does not want that to shift over time. They're kind of incentivized in a way to maintain static,
right?
To not move or shift. And so they can start to lose favor from people. And also like people just get tired of like the same people here are telling us what to do constantly. I want this to be different. I want someone who represents me more than that person does, and me and my family and my group of people.
We've seen that happen in our lifetime. We watched Princess Diana, who was very much so bucked the norm of the royals in England, and it didn't work out, right? Or like Meghan Markle, like they did not follow the conformities. They did not like the rules and stuff. Like you can say what you want about them, but like the truth is like ultimately they were detractors from the standards and the status quo that is the current royal family, and that has been for decades and decades and decades. And it caused a ruckus. It ruffled feathers, and they weren't really doing anything besides being human beings. But the royals were like, no, you don't do that. Like they caused a whole kerfuffle over it.
I think that's actually a beautiful segue into sort of thinking about the privilege and the status that comes with royalty, because this is one of the things that had me thinking about this in the first place, is sort of what it means, what status they have. And very broadly speaking, I found this cool paper that was talking about sort of how class systems form, because most animal groups, there are a lot of social animals out there that live in groups, and they will form a sort of hierarchy, but nothing like the class structure that we see among humans. The humans will almost always organize into like an elite, a middle class, and a lower class. And actually, most people end up in the lower class. It's like 50% or more tend to be in the lower class. And so you concentrate then the remaining 50% in sort of the middle, and then a tiny fraction up there at the top in the elite there, and sort of the pyramidal shape, if you will, in terms of how it's organized. But inside the privilege, you think about like what happens in royals' lives. And there is the very swanky, cushy, plush, comfortable part of it. They get custom tailored clothes, which we need to return to.
Mhm.
They get to throw lavish balls. They have very expensive, ornate, high quality decorations. There was one we were reading about where there was like a ruling hall with $12 million chandeliers in it,
Yeah.
decked out in gold and crystals and stuff. Like just this insane, over the top, gaudy, lavish lifestyle that they live. That is part of it.
Yeah, and then the other part too is like the amount of what are in many articles described as servants,
Yeah.
the amount of resources that are pulled together for a single family. Like it is pretty absurd. I mean, one of the articles that we read talked about how royals were never encouraged to do work or even learn.
Yeah.
Like they were like, they don't even encourage them to learn.
Yeah. And they have to rule. They have to to make decisions about the government and
Yeah.
policies and people. And they would come into power being barely literate, not understanding how economics work, like believing that tariffs are a tax on other countries. And like they were very stupid people. Because again, the privilege was actually their downfall in the sense that it was a great weakness for them. They were not challenged. They would sometimes go to private schools, but they were sometimes not required to do anything at all. And so they would be very bad at being humans, basically, because they didn't have to learn anything growing up.
Well, and let's talk about for a second how ridiculous it is that like royalty was kind of like contingent upon passing that down to the next oldest. Like
Right.
some children were kings, specifically Henry the Sixth, I believe. Or Henry the Fourth. I can't. I'm terrible with Roman numbers. It's VI
6.
6. That's what I thought. Okay, so Henry the Sixth became king when he was 8 months old.
Wow.
So
That's young.
that's young.
I would have been a bad king at 8 months.
Yeah. And this has happened like all the way up until 1992, where King Oyo of Toro in Uganda became king at 3 in 1992.
Wow.
Or in 1995. Sorry. So like this is like something that still happens. And so I guess maybe my point in that is, doesn't it seem ridiculous?
Right.
The whole thing.
What should be the standard of someone who makes decisions on behalf of an entire group of people? Is it that they have a pulse? Because that seems like a low standard to have.
Mm-hmm.
I would much more respect the position of someone where it was like, you are the most competent, the most accomplished, the most above rebuke in your accomplishments and education and ability to correctly assess and navigate complex situations. Not, you have eyes, you were born sometime, you should be king.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I think when we're talking about the complexity of a job, like having to navigate relationships between other ruling governments, you should be the most intelligent person in the room,
Right.
not the dumbest. I mean, as much as is possible, but it's a very weird place we find ourselves where we're like, we have specifically in many instances, and to this day, continue to select people who would not be good representatives of us or stewards of our resources because they are good at making us afraid. They're good
Right.
at speaking down to us because they think and treat us as if we're stupid, because they don't understand anything and all they know how to do is like use rhetoric. Anyway, it's clear I've gotten off track of what we were talking about, I think.
No, I think that aligns, and that goes back to the argument that it's not sustainable, because you've got a person in power who is not fit for power.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
There are some situations and there are some monarchies that have like groomed those folks to take over, and they learn the ins and outs, and they do all the things. But for the most part, it's kind of a haphazard system that just says, oh, you were born this way, so you get to automatically get this power regardless of your skill set or your knowledge or your ability to lead. And so now you end up in a situation where you are grossly incompetent in that role. You can't sustain that. It will not last.
And to be fair, like I definitely read that in a lot of instances where someone very young or for whatever reason not particularly well suited to the job would mostly be just a figurehead, but they would specifically, like the powers that be would select an advisor who was much more seasoned, much more experienced, much more competent, who would actually sort of make the decisions, but that the person who was the royalty would sort of be presented as as the face of the royalty, even though they weren't really wielding any power necessarily.
Right.
They were also quite easily manipulated. But so another aspect of, we need to come back to that actually as another piece, but another aspect of the privilege I thought I just wanted to turn to is that there's also a lot of restrictions for the monarchy. Technically, like, kings and queens can kind of do whatever they want to a point, at least they could in the past. And apparently in, what was it? We were talking, it was like in the Scandinavian royalty, they like ride bikes around everywhere.
Yeah.
They've kind of gone the more I'm of the people route, which I think is cool. Honestly, I think I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
But there is also a certain level of like, there are a lot of influences that force them to do and be certain things. They have to dress a certain way. They have to attend certain balls. Like, everything they do and say might have political implications with other kingdoms. So they have to receive these people and put them up in their nicest rooms. They have to travel to them and dine with them. There's a lot of ritual, and like them saying and doing things that are inappropriate can land them in a lot of hot water. They could be threatened. They could be killed. They could have privileges revoked. They could be usurped. And so there were a lot of pressures, like someone who was too willing to say yes to try and appease people around them were just as easily, if not more, manipulated into doing things they should not have done, as people who were like really aggressive and refused to listen to others and were then, violently cast out or otherwise taken over and forced into a more public figure role. So there was an aspect of that position that, like, it's kind of a crappy job to have, no matter, I mean, there are things about it that people would obviously love, but there are also things about it that would chandeliers, yeah. But I mean, like, people are always watching you. You are the face of everything. Cameras are on you. Eyes are on you. Everything you do is being scrutinized. Yeah. Everything you eat, everything you wear, every place you show up, every place you don't show up is like a political statement. It's like there are aspects about it that kind of suck, that I think force their behavior such that, like, they probably don't have a lot where it's just do whatever. There's a lot of like, you have to be at this appointment and then this thing and this ribbon cutting and this event, and you have to go here and dine with this person and host this person, and like their schedule's kind of packed all the time. But that's just another sort of aspect of it that maybe someone would love, but I would not.
Yeah. No. I would be miserable in that space.
Throughout history, mostly kings have dressed very, very, very lavishly. Lots of frills, custom tailored clothing. Things are very ornate.
God, so many frills, so many powdered wigs.
So many powdered wigs. Oh, we should talk about wigs. I watched a really interesting video on this.
We'll do an episode on wigs. Yeah.
We'll need to do an episode on wigs. Anyway, very, very ornate. And I got to wondering, I was like, why do, like, kings could presumably walk around naked if they wanted to. They could wear a Speedo, they could wear rags, they could do whatever they wanted. Now, again, there are like aspects of this, other monarchies, how they would treat them and how that might be perceived in the public and whatnot. But why would a king explicitly choose to dress in this way if they didn't have to? Apparently, by the way, in Britain in particular, the kings would wear these very tight stockings that would go all the way up. So they were basically pantyhose. And then they would also wear high heels to show off their shapely legs.
I love it. Good for them.
And functionally, they were skirts that they were wearing, which I honestly, I'm jealous of cultures where men get to wear skirts because they look very comfortable.
For sure. Like, it's like, that's a real thing. Yeah.
They look really comfortable. Anyway, this very lavish over the top dress. And I've been wondering about that and just sort of thinking, why? And the only thing that really makes sense in my mind is that it is a flex. It is, I am better than you. I can afford these nice things. I can look fancy. I'm better than you. Otherwise, you'd be dressing this good. Yeah. And you can't because you're not me. This goes back to the class discussion. Like, they are specifically intended to put you in your place by dressing up. And I think that's kind of the role that all dressing up fashion has served throughout time. And a lot of it because how people dressed was often an imitation of how the king and queen and the royalty were choosing to dress.
Right.
So whatever was in fashion for them became the fashion for everyone. And again, it was them trying to dress up to that station that they sort of aspired to. It's just a way of showing off, I'm better than you. And I think that whenever there's a very unpopular opinion, this is a side tangent, I would want to get into a whole discussion on fashion at some point, but I see people dressing up and to me, they're saying, I'm trying to tell you I'm better than you. And also, I think you're not smart enough to take me at my own level. I'm going to try and dangle something shiny in front of your face to make you pay attention to me because you're not bright enough to do it without me dangling something shiny in front of your face, which is my nice suit or my nice clothes or whatever. And so I personally have always interpreted it as being very disrespectful. I feel when I'm dressing up, I'm being disrespectful to other people. And I also am wise enough to know that that's not how anyone else thinks of it. So I play the game.
Yeah.
But that is, I think the Kings are an excellent showcase of why I have disdain for the fashion orientation of things.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of it is like lost to tradition. Like, I wonder how much of it is like they do it now because that's how it's always been done, but there's no rational reason for why it should be done today. Yeah. So like they don't like consider changing it because it's just like, that's just tradition. That's custom. That's what we've always done. I can't imagine that what is going on today for many royalty like folks are, it makes the same sense as it did 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago, you know?
That's a good point. And I didn't actually dig into like if there was ever a practical purpose that it served, but it's funny you mentioned this is another topic I've always wanted to cover is tradition. Cause to me, tradition is the label we give something when its practical utility is long dead.
Yeah.
Like things that we do that have a reason for doing them. We don't call them traditions. There's a reason to do it. Traditions are things that we do because there's no more reason to do it.
Right.
We're just doing it because it has now become a pointless, stupid thing that we do because.
Right.
And so it's like, it is to me, I've always thought of tradition as the label we give to things that do not have a reason to be.
Yeah.
And if that does have a reason to be, it's not a tradition, right? It's just a thing that we do because there's a reason to do it. That's always how I've oriented to it. Anyway, there's probably more to say about monarchy. Monarchies are weird. I think that they're a bad idea. I think they're unsustainable. They're a gross misappropriation of resources. We were looking up, there were these, they'll have like guest chateaus. Like it's like their country house, their country estate with hundreds of rooms.
600 rooms. 600
rooms occupying 50,000 acres. Nobody should have this. This is so pointless. I'm like, this is so not fair to the people who paid for that,
right?
Who don't get to participate in it because it was appropriated by this dick who just happened to be born into this one family.
Right.
I'm like, this does not at all make sense. So like, we're worried about people who are starving to death. There are people who can't get medicine, who can't have clean drinking water. And this guy has got a house that could literally house a village of people. Like it's just absurd. And so I think that monarchies are dumb. They're a bad system of government. They are not sustainable and they suck and they're bad for people. The incentives that exist make them worse as they go on.
Yeah.
So I think that's my final take home is don't have monarchies because they're bad.
That is the take home point. I think that's what it is. I don't think that there could be another take home point with that.
I mean, it literally it's built off of selfishness and greed and like, that's it. And then like, they just keep doing it because they can.
Right. Exactly.
They're not helpful, not super functional. Anyway, I guess where I do the thing of like, where am I wrong about this? Because I sort of always end up thinking that in my mind is like, in governments where you have a democracy, where you have a lot of balances of power, there can be so much bureaucratic red tape that it can be difficult to get things done.
Right.
And in systems where you have a lot of power concentrated in the hands of a very competent person who is literate and not probably running for president of the United States.
Right.
From Florida. Anyway, like they can actually get a lot of stuff done without necessarily having to go through 1,000 channels that take forever to get it done. So I could see someone making that case of like, there's an efficiency that can be brought to someone who has a lot of power, who's also very competent and can work through those systems. But bureaucratic systems exist because they prevent bad things from happening. And when someone does something just because they have a whim to do it, even when it's well-intentioned, it can completely fall apart. So again, it is better safe than sorry. I'd rather have the bureaucracy that prevents bad things from happening slow down progress than race ahead on something that might work, but could also completely destroy everyone's lives.
Right. Nailed it.
Okay. Now I'm done.
Okay, there we go. That's a nice cap on it.
We went so much deeper on this, and I thought we would even be able to go. Let's go ahead and get to the end of this discussion that we're going to have today. But first, we'll make you suffer through one more set of ads. right. Now, we always like to close out our discussions by talking about some things that we're going to recommend, whatever they might be. And it could be anything. It could be activities. It could be books, movies, television shows, music that we're listening to, whatever. I don't know. I've said all the things. And anyway, we'll recommend those. But first, I must speak to the people. I must go through the credits here because they are so important. We do the credits because we are appreciative of the people that help make this show continue to be a show. And what that means is that if you would like to have your name read on the credits, you can join us over on Patreon. You get other perks too. One of them is that I'm going to read your name. Another is that you get early episodes, ad-free episodes, behind the scenes content, and you just help us be a show. And like, that's really cool. If you can't afford that, that's cool. Totally get it. Thank you for listening at all. Please go tell a friend. But for those people who could do that, I just want to say thank you. Mike M, Megan, Mike T, Justin, Kim, Joshua, Brad, Stephanie, Olivia, Brian, Ashley, Kiara, and Michelle. Thank you all so much. Just really, we appreciate you.
Love you all. Love you all so much.
In addition, thank you to my team of people writing and fact-checking from Shane and myself. Our social media coordinator is Emma Wilson, and Justin is the man behind the microphone who makes us sound like a podcast, really.
Yeah, he's the best.
And of course, thank you all for listening. Thank you for recording with me today, Shane.
Hey, anytime. Happy to be here.
On this weird Tuesday evening recording.
I know.
Is there anything that I forgot or anything you would like to add before we recommend some things?
Go listen to Doomtree's No Kings.
Cool. Great. Well, let's leave it vague at that, and we'll do some recommendations.
Yeah, I love it.
Recommendations.
Okay, I'm recommending a movie. It's kind of an old movie now, but that's what I've been on. I didn't get to the theater much in the last year and a half, and so I'm watching movies as they come out on streaming. And one of those movies is a sort of sequel, prequel, follow-up, I don't know. It's in the sphere of this movie. It's called Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. So this is sort of supposed to be a prequel to Mad Max. It is the story of the other main character in that movie, Furiosa, played by Charlize Theron. And this movie is played by Anya Taylor-Joy. This movie got a lot of hate from critics, and I don't exactly know why. I thought the trailers looked awful. To be fair, like I actually thought the movie looked bad, but I went and watched it and I was like, this is a super good movie. Like it's got more story than Mad Max Fury Road, which was a phenomenal movie.
Fury Road was written in all caps.
It was definitely written in all caps.
Yeah.
This movie, it's got wonderful acting, great scenery, incredible practical effects in a lot of it. There was like a lot of CGI, but it technically had about the same number of CGI shots as the original Mad Max, not original, but the Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
And it also was like a little bit longer. So like they did use a lot of practical effects, and it's a good movie. Like I remember I defended the Flash movie, and I can rightfully understand the criticisms of that movie. Sure. I still thought it was fun. This is like legitimately a good movie. Furiosa is. So like I'm kind of sad that it got so much hate. It's good. Like go watch it. It's streaming on Max at the time that we're recording this, HBO, for those of you who don't want to call it Max because that's a dumb name. But yeah, so that's where I watched it. And then if not, like go out and get it from Redbox or something. I don't know, go check. It's really, if you're into action movies and visual feast for the eyes, and it is actually good storytelling, go check out Furiosa, a Mad Max saga.
It's on my list. I have been wanting to watch it. I heard it's really good.
Oh, Chris Hemsworth in this. I mean, he is just chewing the scenery, as they say.
He's great in everything.
He is so good. I mean, he's really laying into that character just beautifully. So just all around good performances. Great stuff.
I love it. All right. So I'm also going to recommend a movie. Mine is a little bit less intense in like action, I think. Where it makes up for that is in emotion. And that is a movie called The Iron Claw. Did you get to see this one yet?
No. Is this a boxing movie?
It's a wrestling movie, actually. So it's about the Von Erich family. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Von Erich family, it's based on a true story. This family was a wrestling family. It was the kids of a wrestler named Fritz Von Erich, whose signature move was the Iron Claw, where he would grab your skull and he could squeeze, and that's how he would win. Well,
wow.
he was a little bit hard on his kids. They all got into wrestling, and there was a curse. They called it the curse of the Von Erich family, where like most of the siblings, actually all of the siblings except for one, died under like freak accident circumstances or mental health, or lots of things happened in this movie.
Ooh.
Pretty intense. Zac Efron plays Kevin Von Erich, the main.
Oh, this is the Zac Efron one. He got so bulky for this.
And yeah, he's ripped in this one. And then Jeremy Allen White is Carrie Von Erich. And just basically the whole story is just like tragedy after tragedy at this family. And then like Zac Efron's character kind of like dealing with it and kind of going like, what is happening? What is this curse? What does this mean? It's shot beautifully. The story, they go over years of story within a few hours, and it's done so well. Everybody that acts in it is incredible. Like, it's amazing. Like, it truly is worth all the critical praise it got.
Okay, is this streaming somewhere or available? How'd you watch
I saw it on a plane, but it is streaming somewhere. Yeah, it should be streaming somewhere. I don't know exactly where, but it's definitely worth the watch.
Okay, great. A couple of movies to check out. All right. Well, we ran very long on this one. What we thought was going to be a short. We didn't even say it was going to be short.
Yeah,
we just thought it, and that made it long. We need more notes for more constrained dialogue. Anyway, we'll let it go at that. Great recommendations. Furiosa, Mad Max Saga, and The Iron Claw are some movies you can check out. And then, of course, if you would like to tell us anything that we got wrong or got right about royalty and monarchies, you should email us directly. You can reach us at info@wwdpodcast.com. We are happy to hear from everyone. You can leave us a comment, go to the 5-star rating, all of that. But I think that is all that I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Shane, before we wrap up?
No, I think that's it.
Thank you, everyone. This is Abraham.
This is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.